Selamat sore, Bapak Ibu terhormatnya di event IGIS-nya sore hari ini. Mohon maaf, sesi ini akan dilakukan pakai bahasa Jerman, enggak pakai bahasa Inggris ya. Okay. So let me please welcome my dear panelists to this fifth Green Talk session of IGIS, second IGIS 2025. I'm welcoming the colleagues from the Green Digital Counselor of the EU Delegation to Indonesia and Brunei Darussalam, the EU Mission to ASEAN, Pak Sander Happerts, please. I'm also inviting the Senior Director of Climate Environmental Defense Fund, Ibu Lulu. Please come to the stage. As well as Ivana Dimitrova from Southeast Asian Energy and Industrial Decarbonization Lead of UK FCDO. Together with my dear colleague from WRI India, Pak Deepak Krishnan, the Deputy Director of Energy Program, WRI India, please. What else could this panel be about than industry decarbonization? Because this is the big topic. It's our second day, it's the afternoon. I know that's a challenging time for me to keep you stick to that session, for you to grab your translation if that's needed, because it's already afternoon. When I have to listen to Bahasa Indonesia from morning till evening, I would now grab probably a translation device that helps me through the session. So for you, maybe this is the time as well, but you have been not listening to so many English sessions today, so I'm happy that you bear with me. I'm also welcoming our colleagues and friends watching from the YouTube stream as well. So I'm very proud that I have this opportunity to speak with so many knowledgeable friends and partners here from taking some of the international examples on how industry decarbonization can work. There's one particular topic that we would like to discuss today, which is the ETS. And that has like multi-facets. It's done in different ways. We have learned it in different setups that requires different measures and different governance structures around. And I would like to do a little round of giving you the opportunity to talk about your experience and how it's done from the EU, China, the UK, and then looking into our next candidate, India, to see what we can learn here in Indonesia from ETS setups globally. I would like to hand over directly, without further delay, to you, Sander, please, to give us a little bit of background information. So, how does it work in the UA? How do we do it? How is it done? Where do the revenue go? How is it refueled into the system and really helping industry decarbonization to pick up? So please.
Thank you, Johannes. Selamat sore, Bapak Ibu. So yes, let me guide you through the basics of the EU ETS, so the emissions trading system in the European Union. In the European Union, the ETS has been in place since 2005. So by now we have around 20 years of experience in emissions trading and in carbon pricing. And the ETS has, in those 20 years, really evolved into being what we call the backbone of our entire climate transition in Europe. And I hope at the end of the panel you will also understand why. So how does it work? It is really a cap and trade system. So, and it covers the power sector, so the energy for electricity and heating and cooling. It covers carbon-intensive industry, and it covers air transport within Europe, and since recently also maritime transport within Europe. Those sectors are about 36% of the emissions in Europe. So this is what is covered by our cap and trade system. the cap means that there is an overall ceiling of how many emissions there can be from all these sectors combined in Europe. So not in any of the individual European member states, but as a whole. It's like a bubble, if you will. So all those industries can emit a certain amount of emissions per year. That's the cap, but the cap is shrinking. So every year the cap becomes smaller and there is a smaller amount of emissions available in the system per year. And this shrinking of the cap, this reduction line, is linked to the overall targets that we have for Europe for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And currently we have binding targets in place for 2030, which is for the EU as a whole, so 100% of our emissions for 2030, it is 55% reduction compared to 1990. And for 2050, it is 0, yeah? So we aim to be the first climate neutral continent in the world. And the ETS, the cap, shrinks in line with those targets. So how does it work? Who is actually part of the system? It is companies, so around 8,500 installations, so either power installations or industrial installations, plus 400 aircraft or maritime operators. Those are the actors in the system, and they need to monitor and report their emissions, of course. This is where it starts. We need to have the reporting of the emissions, and every year they need to what we call surrender allowances. So basically they have to give carbon allowances to the authorities. And this has to be the same amount than what they actually emit in that year of CO2 equivalents. So how do they get those allowances? There are 3 ways in which such a company can have allowances that they then surrender. More than half of the allowances are auctioned, so that is the first way. So 57% of the allowances are auctioned in a real auction system. Second way is that they buy the allowances from other companies, because perhaps a company has a certain amount of allowances that they acquired, but they actually performed better, so they emitted less, and then they have allowances to sell. So this is a financial incentive for them to perform better. And in some cases, and I will explain, certain allowances are given for free to the companies. So in these 3 ways, companies can have allowances. And this makes that the carbon price, the price that is paid for such an allowance, is a market price. So it evolves every day according to demand and supply. When I checked yesterday, the price was 71 euros for a ton of CO2. That is about $83 US. That was the price yesterday. So zooming in on the industry sector, because the industry sector has particular challenges, challenges that are different from the power sector, and also the logic as part of the transition is different for these 2 sectors. For the power sector in Europe, the direction is very clear. It is going to full decarbonization. So actually already ahead of 2050, our power sector will have to be 0 emissions. That means that electricity, heating and cooling in Europe can only be renewables or nuclear. That's the only options. So that is very clear. No future for fossil fuels in Europe. Coal power plants will have to be closed down, and other, gas also, that's phasing out, that's clear. But for industry, it's of course a different logic. There is not a logic of phase out or complete switching. It's really a logic of transformation. So the industrial sector has to transform, and that's a different logic, and a logic that is also linked to a particular problem or risk that we see, which we call carbon leakage. Carbon leakage means that by having certain ambitious policies in place, we would actually have as a consequence that emissions rise elsewhere. So for instance, if a steel company closes down in Europe, but it then produces in another part of the world to then bring steel to Europe, we have no gains on climate-wise. So this is a carbon leakage, and because of this risk, the industrial sector receives a large amount of their allowances to emit for free. However, this is not just free money. Yeah? It's not just here are your allowances and you can just continue to do whatever you want. It doesn't work like that, and this is one of the lessons that we have learned in those 20 years of experience. Even those free allowances, they come with conditions attached. They are, and I will not enter into too many details, but they are linked to performance benchmarks. So for instance, a steel company receives only the number of allowances that the most efficient steel company needs to produce that amount of steel. So that means that even if the steel sector gets their allowances for free, they still are incentivized to perform better, because then they will not be needing to buy extra allowances on the market, or they could even sell the allowances that they get for free to other operators. So there is still this incentive. So that is more or less how it works. I can enter into details if you want, but let me just also share a few messages about the results that we have achieved with this, because the overall outcome of this system is that in the sectors covered by the system, in those 20 years, we have already reduced 47% of the emissions of those sectors. So that is incredibly powerful conclusion of the system. And this means that for our entire economy, so I told you in the beginning, the ETS covers 36% of our emissions. So for our entire economy, the ETS has contributed to the fact that we have reduced our emissions since 1990 until now with 37%. But in that same period, the European economy grew by 70% if you count by GDP. So we have achieved the decoupling of economic growth and carbon emissions. I think this is a really powerful signal, and it also shows that our policies work. And as I said before, the ETS is the backbone of those policies. So this has not been the result from one day to the next. It was 20 years of learning. It was 20 years of mistakes also. But we believe that we have certain powerful conclusions and interesting lessons to share. And this is what we are also doing with our international partners.
Thank you very, very much, Sandra. That sounds really like a powerful, as you said, and a big success story. I think we will have time to look a little bit on the nitty-gritty parts of that and the learning curves, the ups and downs that the EU went through, let's put it like that, over the last 20 years. But before that, I would like to hand over to Ivana and ask, so in the UK, you're part of the system as well. You were part of it. You're coming back in probably. So let's talk a little bit about the concrete examples. So how did it work out in your case? How more drastic strategies did you put in place to for your country? What would be maybe also an advice learning from the on and off situation that you were facing as well?
Thank you, Johannes, and afternoon, everyone. So you just spoiled the quiz question I had for the audience. So in the UK, we've also had the ETS for 20 years, and those of you who have been following Brexit probably guessed that we were part of the EU ETS, and we were part of the EU ETS, and we were part of it since 2005. But after Brexit, we actually took the opportunity to rethink it and design our own UK ETS, and in a way start from scratch and see, well, how can we make the UK ETS sort of the workhorse and the delivery vehicle of our net zero ambition. So in the UK, we have a net zero target by 2050. And after we exited the EU ETS, we said, okay, well, we have to go faster in terms of limiting emissions and the cap we set for the power, the industry, and the aviation sector in the UK. So after we left the EU ETS, we actually tightened the cap, so in the cap and trade scheme. Originally we said to business back in 2021, power industry sector, you have around 156 million ton of CO2. That was their annual budget for 2021. And by 2025, we tightened the cap by 44%. And when we set the 10-year ETS cycle back in 2021, we said by 2030, you will go from 156 million ton of CO2 to around 50 million of ton of CO2. So that is almost a third reduction in the cap. And that has also led to the change in the carbon price that we've seen in the UK. So when we first started the ETS as part of the EU, it probably started at around £5 per ton of CO2, so that's around 200,000 Indonesian rupiah. Very comparable to what you're seeing currently in the voluntary market here. But now it's actually more around 1.8 million Indonesian rupiah per ton of CO2. And this is where we actually start sending a signal to industry that actually high carbon intensive interventions come with a high carbon price. So this is kind of where the cap has been really instrumental in changing industry behavior. But, and it has had similar impact. We've done a little bit better in terms of reducing emissions. So ever since we designed the UK ETS and together with the EU ETS, we've reduced emissions by around 54%. Similarly, we didn't actually do it at the cost of economic competitiveness. Our economy also grew by 80%, so almost doubling of the size of the economy. So I guess the message here is that you don't have to sacrifice economic competitiveness whilst also reducing emissions. But I also want to focus on the trading part of this, and my EU counterpart explained that really well. But I think that the cap and trade is a really effective mechanism, mostly because it allows businesses to take the lead by trading allowances. Because for some businesses, it might be easier to reduce emissions by adopting low carbon technologies. For some of them, it might be easier by switching fuels. And we've seen that in the steel and the cement sector. For others, maybe retrofits or even investing in new technologies like CCS. But the whole point behind the trading part is that you let businesses lead and take it in a low cost and address it in a low cost way. And maybe let me wrap up with the sort of what is the lesson. I would say the lesson in setting up any scheme like the cap and trade, despite the blip that was Brexit, I feel like we have provided certainty and predictability in the way this is designed. So we designed it in 10-year cycles. So business today in the UK have a fairly good idea of what the trajectory of carbon of the cap would be and how much emissions they have at their disposal. So in that sense, giving business advance notice means that financiers, investors, they would know actually, it does make sense investing and pivoting towards low carbon technologies because we have the price signal that comes from the UK ETS. So if I could summarize maybe the lessons, certainty and predictability by taking a long-term horizon and giving indication of what the trajectory of emission looks like 10, even 12 years ahead. So even now in the UK, we are consulting on the design of the ETS in 2031. So that's the certainty and predictability, but also flexibility for business, giving them enough notice and in a way setting the rules of the game, but understanding that businesses are the ones who are better placed to decide on the trajectory. Let me wrap it up here.
Thank you very much, Ivana. That is something really, really important, I think, and we've seen that also in other on other topics, actually, that this predictability is quite an important part of policy making. Maybe I'll go off from my previous protocol a little bit, Sandra, and ask you again. So in the EU, what about the next cap levels? Is it all defined? Is it already discussed and agreed? And you mentioned that it's a bubble across the whole European nations and governments. So how is it then translated there in national legislation, and who would be responsible for setting the cap and taking care of the MRV as well? Can you give us a little bit of an example, because I think it's quite interesting, also looking at the ASEAN context here in Indonesia and in the region?
Yes, thanks for the question, and you should know, of course, that the more specific you ask your questions, the more complicated the response will be. But in terms of the cap, who decides it? It's very clear. This is done at EU level, and that of course means that all the member states decide, but once it's decided, it's at EU level that it's implemented and monitored also. And so the ETS, for those who like quiz questions, it covers, of course, the 27 member states plus Norway, Liechtenstein, and Iceland. And in fact, but only for the power sector, also Northern Ireland is still in the ETS, so we are still very, very close. But so it's decided by the European Union, and the cap is currently the trajectory. All the details are set in stone until 2030, but the overall objectives and trajectory are known and predictable, if you want to use that word, until 2050. This is what I explained before, because that's the climate neutrality. Where we currently are is that the European Commission, so one of the institutions, let's say, has proposed early July the new target and all the related elements for 2040. So whereas we know that overall we want to go to, or we need to go to 55% reduction 2030 and 0 in 2050, how exactly the line is between those is still, somehow debatable. But we have now made a proposal for 2040, and this is currently being discussed between the European Parliament, so that is the institution that is directly elected, represents the European citizens, and the member states that represent the interest of the 27 member states. So there is still room for maneuver of how fast we go between 2030 and 2050, how exactly the trajectory will be. But overall, the line and the direction is very clear. It is net zero in 2050, and that means for the power sector, complete decarbonization ahead of 2050, because of course we have still other sectors like agriculture and things where it's a bit more difficult, a bit less clear, also transport. So, but for the ETS sectors, it is relatively clear. And this also means that the cap setting, the monitoring, the auctioning, how the trading works for the ETS sectors, that is all an EU competence. So the member states have no further say on that. They do, and I can elaborate on that if you want, they do have a say on the use of the revenues, that is the auctioning revenues, because they flow back mostly to the member states themselves. But of course, for the sectors outside the ETS, I mentioned agriculture, land use, forestry, that is much more a member state competence, a national competence. There we set our targets together at EU level, but the way of reaching those targets, the policies put in place to reach those targets is much more a national affair. So in Europe, it really depends on the sector, on the competence that you are talking about, whether it's EU or national or a mix of both.
Thank you very much. I know that, of course, questions that become more detailed will resolve in more detailed answers and more complex answers. And I have to admit, I'm a European citizen, but this whole game between the EU regulations and then the national implementation, it's something that's also challenging for us in the EU as well. Thank you very much for the explanation. So taking this example, this is only one side. This is only one option on how it can be done. We have like 20 years of experience here. I would like to ask Lulu to give us a little bit of an overview, and then also maybe going into the same direction. So how is your trajectory? How predictable is that trajectory actually in China at the moment? And after that, we'll definitely pick up on a few questions. I'm already telling that to my colleagues here, so you can prepare. What do these member states actually do with the revenue? That is something that really I think is quite interesting for our audiences as well. But first of that, please, Lulu, give us the China example.
Thank you. Thank you for the slides. Can I go to the next one? And next one, please. Yes, thank you. This is the one. So unlike EU, China's carbon market, it's relatively new. The trading actually started in the year of 2021. And it is a carbon market that we see by covered emission, it is the largest. But actually, it's still very challenging because China is still on its way to pick its emission when it's established carbon market. And the situation is very similar to a lot of the other developing countries because they have to face the challenge of increasing emission and to trying to reduce emission at a cost-effective way. So right now, China carbon market covered 4 sectors. Power generation is the one covered the longest. It's around 5 billion tons of CO2 per year. And start the beginning of this year, the coverage of ETS in China expanded to another 3 industry sectors for the first time ever. That's iron steel, aluminum, and the cement, which means China's carbon market right now come into a phase that emissions are going to cover by industry sectors, and also allowance will be traded between different industry sectors. And also, about 5% of the CCR, which is the certified emission reduction credit, it's the voluntary credit, is allowed to be used for compliance purpose by the companies that will be covered by the ATS. And on the other hand, there's also a national voluntary carbon market has been built. And it was relaunched in the year of 2024 with 6 methodologies right now, and 4 new methodologies are in the public consultation phase right now, and already around 9.48 million tons of CCR has been issued that could contribute to the compliance market. Next slide, please. So come back to the national compliance carbon market. 4 sectors means China right now around 8 billion tons of CO2 per year are covered by a form of carbon pricing. That's a huge number. And also around 3,600 companies need to comply with their annual emission reduction goal. Next slide. Thank you. So this is the price of carbon right now in China. So it started from around 50 RMB, $7 US. Right now, yesterday, the price it's around 10.5 US. So China carbon market price doubled within the past 5 years. Let's come to the next slide. And for national voluntary carbon market, that's what a lot of the other Asian countries are interested about, because right now the voluntary carbon market in China started in 2012. That's a long time ago, but that was for the purpose of a supplement of CDM. So the relaunch of national carbon market means right now the new voluntary carbon market aims to have a higher quality, higher environment integrity, and to help better facilitate emission reduction that are not covered by the compliance market. And we want to use this mechanism to facilitate more emission reduction from a wider participants. So thank you. Next slide. And this is the price of voluntary carbon market in China. It's around the same price of compliance market, which is relatively rare globally, but it also means that China has a huge potential to develop more methodologies in this area. Next slide. Thank you. So I want to come back to a more high-level talk around carbon market in China. So a lot of people would love to say carbon market is a policy instrument. But in China, we see it's more of a policy instrument. It's more than a policy instrument. It's more of a policy infrastructure. China started to have this idea of pilot carbon market in the year of 2012. And in the year of 2015, China decided it wanted to build a national carbon market upon the experience collected in the pilot ETS in the provincial and city level. So China firstly built its legal foundation of carbon market at state council level, which means to all of the enterprises, they understand there's a price if you emit carbon in China. So it is a policy. It's one of the first climate policy with tools in China, and it's very strong. And secondly is the MRV system, is the data accounting system. Before carbon markets, there's no enterprise level data accounting system for greenhouse gas emission. And carbon markets started to collect enterprise level greenhouse gas emission from 2013 until now on a yearly basis. And not only power sector and the other 4 sector covered, all of the key industry sector are covered by this MRV system. So additional industry covered are petrochemical and chemical, paper and palm, and also aviation. So although they are not all covered by carbon market right now in China, but with the accounting system, it gives the enterprises a very clear signal where they're going to go and where are the potential they could reduce their emission, and they understand whether they are advanced or fall back compared with the average of their industry in China. And capacity building. So capacity building is crucial in this puzzle. For example, as a country, as a developing country to start build a carbon market, we don't have enough expertise domestically. We need to build our think tanks capacity, the government officials' understanding, and the third-party verifiers, the service providers' understanding, and also the industry's understanding. What is climate change? What is carbon market? Like our colleague just said, the logistic and the economists behind it and what they need to do. So this consensus building and capacity building is crucial for the long-term climate goal to be achieved. And penalty and financial incentives are another important factor. Because if you don't comply annually, there's a penalty, there's a fine you need to pay. So that's a clear signal to the company that this is something that the central government or strong political view is driven, and also they need to act now. And in the long term, if they don't change their behavior, they need to pay more penalty than the current status. And the final is competitiveness perspective. It changes people's mind. If you don't abandon or take care of your stringent asset, you will be in a loose position in the longer term. So that's the experience we actually collect from the current state. Thank you.
Thank you, Lulu. Yeah, that's quite impressive, and I will pick up on a few of those policy infrastructure, as you called it, items here, because I'm looking a little bit ahead to our colleague from WRI India as well. So like, now you have heard 20 years Europe, 20 years plus in the UK, and then also very early on start with establishing accounting and MRV system in China. You see there's clear guidance, like you need to establish that first. You need to make sure that you have a very clear target that you're working towards is embedded in your policies. Now everything clear for India? Where are you? Okay, give us your perspective, please.
Thank you, Johannes. And good afternoon, everyone. And I'll start with a promise by saying that in 2027 or 28, I hope to have some slides like what our colleagues had. But yeah, it's true that the carbon credit market or ETS market in India is going to be launched in 2026. The first point which Lulu mentioned about setting the legal framework, that has already been done. The notifications are out, the different roles and responsibilities of the agencies, who will do what, that has been identified. And recently notifications have also come out in terms of identifying what is the emissions benchmark for different sectors. So the key difference at the moment between India and what the other markets which our colleagues have described is it's not a strict cap and trade kind of thing. It's a rate-based system where these performance benchmarks for, let's say, cement sector, a steel sector, which means I'm going to say that in this year, industries who need to comply with this mechanism can only, their emissions have to be so much per ton of carbon equivalent. And then the idea is at the end of this performance cycle, there will be an audit of how they have performed, and those who have met that performance benchmark, they'll be allowed to generate credits and all that. So it's in that way not a very strict cap and trade kind of system. But otherwise, the principles remain the same. We will have an MRV system. We will have this certificates being traded in the markets, and hopefully penalties and rewards will also be suitably defined. But having said all that, there is actually a basis upon which a lot of this is being built, which is called a perform, achieve, and trade system, which has been there since 2012. Now, this exclusively focuses on energy conservation and energy efficiency. So if you see what the perform, achieve, and trade scheme does is, similarly, it identifies different sectors. It, there was a cadre of energy auditors was developed, and that formed a part of the capacity building exercise that was also mentioned. And for each of these sectors, again, energy benchmarks were, set up. So for instance, in steel, when, in 2012, in the first cycle, there was a benchmark which was set, and, companies were expected to, reduce their energy consumption to the levels below that. Now, the learning from the first cycle was that the targets could have been tightened much more. There was significant overachievement, and as a result of which the certificates, which were called the energy saving certificates or e-certs, the price was very low, and there was no incentive for people to actually, put in the efforts to reduce, their energy consumption. Now, therefore, in subsequent cycles, we have also seen a tightening of these benchmarks, and making it a little more stringent, and try to get more meaningful efforts by some of these companies to, for instance, take up energy efficiency efforts. So as a result, what has happened in the latest assessment is close to 110 million tons of CO2 cumulatively over 6 cycles from 2012. That's the amount of savings which has been documented by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. And this is the basis on which the 3 principles of setting more ambitious targets, having a floor price for some of these certificates so that the revenue is assured for people who are participating in the market, and then combining the energy and climate related aspects and launching an overall carbon market. So when this is launched, it will not just be industrial sector and the renewable energy sector that participates. There is also going to be emissions from agriculture also, which are going to be covered in this carbon market.
Okay, thank you very much. So a little bit of a different system. I'll pick one of the policy infrastructure topics that Lulu mentioned in terms of capacity development. I think it's really a very important part, looking at the long history it took in the EU and also in China to develop it. You mentioned that your system, basically the performance rating system, already started in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So you also look at the long history. In terms of the capacity building that is required, where do you see, what are your lessons learned? Like who are the key players, the key instruments that really need to be, that really showed this being effective on the ground?
Right. So I think when the Perform, Achieve, Trade scheme was launched, the problem of capacity building was identified front and center. the government realized that there is, even for this scheme to succeed and for, auditing and, this market to be created, a cadre of energy auditors needs to be created. So that did come up, and you find that there is now a certification process that the government has also set in, wherein you have a technical examination every year that you take, you become a certified energy auditor, and then you are eligible to go and audit these industries which are under the ambit of this particular scheme. So you can, and your audit is the one which is going to be recognized when it comes to understanding whether this company has met those targets or not, and can certificates be issued? If yes, how much? So that cadre creation has now resulted in a lot of professionals in India writing this examination. And there are industry bodies also, like the Confederation of Indian Industry, ASSOCHAM, Federation of, and so a lot of these, and a lot of consulting firms, like even the big fours, like the PwCs and all, they have energy auditors embedded within their consulting team. So that has also actually created a lot of job opportunities, not only maybe as a government auditing entity, but even in the private sector, in terms of consulting services, assurance services. Lots of job opportunities have also come up because of this foresight that was there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's an important aspect to look at this as also a green job generator somehow. I want to highlight quickly on our big screen here, you see a QR code where you, from the audience, can actually bring up your questions to us, and then they will be curated, and we are happy to read it and bring it to the stage here. I also see that it has already been started. I'll read that question in a minute. Maybe going back to what I teased already earlier, the revenue. Big word. Is there revenue? How big is it? What are national states in the EU doing actually with the money? How does it then hopefully fuel back the decarbonization in the industries that are affected by the system, or have to look at this system on an annual basis? But what are they doing with it? What is the national governments helping industries to keep up with competitiveness and really still make their business? So maybe Sander first, and then maybe an example as well from the UK, and then I'll read the question here, please.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, yes, there is revenue. In the 20 years that we've had so far, the auctioning of allowances has brought already more than 230 billion euros. That is really a lot of money. And actually most of it in the most recent years, because this is also part of our experience. In the beginning, the price was really low. But in the past few years, the system is really very solid, and the revenue is considerable. So where does this 230 billion euros go? A part of it, a relatively modest part, but still with these numbers it's significant. A part of it goes back to the EU level into two different funds. One fund is then awarded to projects to support breakthrough innovation. So this is really where we support the most novel technologies, including in industry, for instance, to produce really new technologies for zero carbon steel. So these are the kinds of projects that we support with that funding, which will then eventually also be replicated, and of course the rest of the world can also benefit from it. And the second fund goes to our lowest income member states. So those are really the member states in Europe that have a very old industry still, or because of the past, they still have like coal-fired district heating systems and things like that. So that is the second fund at EU level where that is spent. But the bulk of the money is channeled directly back to member states, or depending on the country, even not to the national government, but to regional government. So in my country, Belgium, for instance, the money goes directly to the regions. And then go back to my earlier comment, it is really their responsibility to spend it with, of course, because it's again complicated, with of course some conditions attached, some strings attached. In the beginning, we said that for 50% of what you get back, you need to spend it on climate measures. And the rest you do really whatever you want with it. Then we changed that to 75%, and now it's 100%. So 100% of the money the governments need to spend on climate measures. And they can choose how. So many use it for public transport, for renewable energy, for energy storage, but also for industry. So again, in my country, I know that a very big, going again to the steel sector, a very big project in one of the biggest steel production installations in Europe receives funding from that source for new technologies. And this is actually currently, in the past few years, a big debate in some EU countries that coming from the industry, that they demand more of the money back. So perhaps going a bit less into public transport, into helping energy communities at risk of energy poverty, and back to industry. So of course, at national level, these are very difficult debates. Yeah, do you support vulnerable consumers, or do you support your industry, or a mix of both? And what is the exact mix? That is something that is really not to be handled at EU level, but at national or even regional or local level, because all our countries are slightly different. So, but these are currently quite heavy debates in some of our countries. The basic principle is that the money flows back entirely to the member states, and these are becoming very important budgets. So these are also becoming a very significant debate, which is why the industry tries to get into that debate, and it's an interesting one. One more point is that this 230 billion, these ETS revenues, that is of course not the only thing that we use to finance the transition. There are of course other parts of the EU budget, for instance, that go in there, and one interesting example that I want to mention is the Just Transition Fund. This is a fund coming from the EU budget that supports not the industries, not the consumers, but the regions or the people and the places that are affected by the transition. For instance, in certain areas of Europe that have been very reliant on one single industrial, company or installation, but which is completely transforming, there are also impacts on the wider community, demographic, and this funding helps to adapt those places so that no one is left behind in the transition.
Thank you very much. Very, very insightful to see how then the revenue is trickled down and who has the authority to utilize that money. And of course, there's national debates about that. I know that from Germany, and also the regional funding is quite important to add this just transition component to the discussion as well. I would like to pick one of the questions that we have been displaying here from Pandu Haryo. There's China used to be the largest carbon emitter, but now is the country with the largest reduction in carbon emissions. Do you have any suggestions for Indonesia to effectively reduce carbon emissions? And I think that question clearly goes to you, Lulu, please.
Thank you. It's an amazing question. I've been thinking it around and around as well. So I actually come up with 4 points. I'll go through very quickly. The first one is local capacity building and establishment. Because when we started to work this thing out in China around 15 years ago, so what you can find out is there's almost zero local capacity. And it's easier to working with a foreign expert who has been in this area for 20 years, know everything. But it's not sustainable. You really need to support local expertise, like professors, think tanks, industries. It will take some time for them to understand this issue, but they will be your major community domestically to help the country come up with the solution that's really suitable for the country's specific characteristics and situation. So building local capacity and have some patience is one of the first recommendations and lessons learned. And the second one, it's really consensus and awareness building. Because when the first carbon market started in 2005, we only have 5% of carbon market of global emission covered by carbon market. And right now, this year, we have 30% of international greenhouse gas are covered by ETS. So it's right now a really consensus globally that carbon market will be expanded coverage to more emissions. And also, if we want to achieve emission reduction, it will not be at a cost of economy loss. So we actually see this in China while building carbon market. We from 2013 to 15, when China started to have pilots market, all of the pilots achieve really huge amount of emission reduction while still have around 7 to 9% of GDP growth rate. So that's a clear fact. So ETS, it's carbon price is really, the BAU is changed. It's not really no emission reduction policy or climate policy. It's either ETS or other policy. So ETS actually give industries more flexibility and its response to market signal more rapidly. And the third one is long-term policy certainty is important, like you said, and I want to emphasize that. Because industry need a longer-term certainty to make a decision. Otherwise, they will just give you money and walk away. So although we might not know what will happen within 5 years, 10 years, how ETS in, for example, Indonesia looks like, but we need to give a very clear goal, what we want to achieve in 10 years or 20 years. And the final point I want to make is, I heard this from an EU expert actually. He said, Lulu, you know, perfect is the enemy of good. So you cannot expect to have a perfect policy and use 10 or 20 years to establish it, and while you miss the opportunity. Especially right now, time is ticking. We really need to get bold and to have the trust on each other to make a fast decision, to have a fast move, instead of just having a consensus that everybody think it's the most scientific way and we approach it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very interesting, and I think it answers clearly the question as well, right? Provide certainty. Don't forget about the capacity development. Really start on developing those institutions that are also independent, right? That really challenge what's happening, but then don't fall into the it needs to be perfect trap somehow. There's another question. India's economy has much similarity with Indonesia. So how do you ensure that the emission restrictions and the emission trading system does not affect the economic growth and has a negative impact national inflation due to the potential increase in commodity prices for products that are subject to those carbon emission limits? And I think I want to couple that with a question, because you mentioned that in India there's, besides energy, industry and transport, part of the transport, you also have agriculture and forests as well?
Yes.
Yes, in the system already. That's different from China as well as the EU and UK. And I think that's a major thing in the Indian economy as well. So I think that's clearly directing to that, and maybe later our colleagues from Ivana from UK can tell us, when are you expanding to the next sector? So what's the next one? I think that's maybe something I would like to know. But first...
Sure. Thank you, Wahyudi. So I think a very pertinent question, and that is the reason why the carbon market design for India is not based on a cap and trade system. Having it as a rate-based system wherein you set performance benchmarks for the sector ensures that if there are economic upheavals which would need that you do not impose some of you are unable to impose some of let's say the stringent requirements of a cap and trade. That is the reason why the rate-based system is chosen, so that you can ease these emission reduction norms also, depending on how the economic situation is, how the, let's say what the trade systems are at that point of time, and adjust those levers accordingly. It's also, pertinent because a lot of industries within India are in the medium and small scale, class of size, which I think would also be the case in Indonesia. And yeah, so I think that's precisely why the design is a little different from that of cap and trade. And in effect, you're also getting them to start working on the decarbonization journey. You are giving performance benchmarks which are based on studies of what is happening in other parts of the geography, other parts of the world. You are assessing how the competitive landscape is also faring, and then taking a call which is a win-win for both parties. So I feel that system, we'll need to see how it is functioning once it is launched, and once the results also come out after a year or two of running. But yeah, fundamentally that's the thinking behind the design.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's quite clear that the different design of the system helps to navigate through fluctuations in economy and not make it as an additional burden, but really take the economic situation into account when do the ETS system there. Ivana. Oh.
Hello. So in terms of the what's next for UK ETS in 2031, so this is again building on my point that we've actually started planning the 2031-2042 UK ETS. So what can you expect and what can UK industry expect? Actually, the sector expansion is probably less exciting. So we are planning on expanding to maritime just as the EU. But there are two more interesting developments that we are consulting on ahead of the 2031 ETS. The first one is how do we incorporate new technologies like CCS and negative emission technologies? And how do we make sure that businesses capturing their emissions, either using CCS or BECCS in the UK, so that's bioenergy and CCS, how do we factor that into the design of the ETS so that they can get the reward from investing in these cutting-edge technologies? So evolving the ETS to account for CCS is one thing. The second one is free allowances. So for some of our trade-exposed sectors, like the steel sector, the aluminum, the fertilizer sector, we are moving to CBAM. So we are removing the free allowances, and actually these sectors have not used many of those because they've invested in low carbon technologies. So actually we've seen the revenue declining in the UK ETS just because actually a lot of sectors are just now going for the low carbon option, technology option. And so I think that these are the exciting developments rather than the sector expansion. So from free allowances to CBAM and accounting for CCS and BECCS in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Deepak,
Yeah,
I saw your hand raised.
Yes,
that means there's something important to add.
I wanted to correct myself and request your forgiveness. I mixed up the sectors which are eligible for carbon credits. It's renewable energy, green hydrogen production, industrial energy efficiency, and mangrove afforestation and reforestation, not agriculture. So I stand corrected on that.
Not yet agriculture. Okay, I think that's for the sector expansion going to be a quite interesting case, and probably will still follow the logic of a benchmark procedure rather than a cap procedure. Integration of CCS, CCUS, and then there was the word CBAM. So I'd like to take that opportunity quickly and ask Sander again, how do you see that development? So they are letting loose on the free allowances and moving to CBAM. So what will be the effect then for the industries themselves? Can you give us an example? Because it's something that I know from the engagement with industries here in Indonesia, it's also quite interesting for them. to see what will be the end users or the exporters, or the effect on the exporters actually in those countries here.
Yes, yeah, I'm very grateful for you to you for mentioning it. So CBAM, for those of you who don't know, this stands for Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It is something that we are in the EU putting in place currently and in the next years, and it's really the next important part of our puzzle, yeah. And that is because, of course, in the EU, like with the UK, we have been successful in reducing our emissions. I mean, the result of that is that our relative share in global emissions is relatively small. So the EU today accounts for less than 6% of global emissions. That's really, really small. But that also gives us, because we would like to continue to lead the climate transition in the world, that gives us the responsibility to make sure that our consumption does not create emissions elsewhere. And that is where the CBAM comes from, coupled with the conclusion that we have now, we do believe that carbon pricing is the most cost-effective way or mechanism in the transition. So what does it mean? That companies who send products to the EU, and this is in certain sectors like steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizer, I think those are the most important ones, they will have to report their emissions or the carbon embedded in their products and which carbon price they have already paid for that in their country of origin. So in China and India, as we've heard, there will already be a certain carbon price that they have paid, which is very good because this gives revenues to these countries as well. But the difference between what is paid and what is in the EU being paid for those kinds of products will have to be paid. That the adjustment that will have to be done at the border. And this will then mean that for these sectors, the free allowance in the EU also disappears. But this will be very, very gradual. So we are currently in the transitional phase. So the CBAM is already there, but no price has to be paid currently. So only emissions have to be reported. But then starting in 2026, but leading up to 2034, so in that will be like gradual entry of the CBAM, where the price will progressively have to be paid, and to the same extent, the free allowance of these sectors within Europe will disappear. So that makes sure that for each product, we have a level playing field across industries. And that means for consumers, I think that there will be a broader competition globally also to have the best technologies. So this is an aspect of fairness that we are building into our system.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that was a quick run through the CBAM system and how it might affect as an additional puzzle to the ETS scheme itself. Looking at the screen here and looking at my watch, time's up for this session. I would love to continue for hours, I think, not 4 hours, but 4 hours, or days even, to further discuss this. Thank you very much to my dear panelists here to give this very insightful presentation and information from your respective background. I think as a takeaway, I heard like in the last round, basically 3 times, the basic fundamental capacity development, which also goes into institutional building, plus the predictability and the clarity in the direction that you produce in terms of policies and governance around ETS and the carbon market is most important. Also, if you plan to expand or add another puzzle to the scheme, and then still giving time to progress in that direction. I think that is something where I really see from all the examples here what Indonesia can learn or could learn from those experiences. And I know that you're all very open and very active already in supporting this ecosystem development or the ecosystem of carbon trading in Indonesia as well. So I'm very proud of that. I know that GIZ is also doing a lot of work in this regard. And yeah, let's thank you again for coming today, listening to us, for your questions. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to continue the discussion afterwards and whenever it's possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Johannes. We kindly request all speakers and moderator to remain stage to receive the token of appreciation. Next, we would like to invite Kepala Pusat Industri Hijau Kementerian Perindustrian, Bapak Apit Priyanugraha, to present the token of appreciation in the form of a certificate and a bonsai plant as a souvenir to our speakers and moderator. The first is Deepak Krishnan, Deputy Director of WRI, India Energy Program. Next is Ivana Dimitrova, Southeast Asia Energy and Industrial Dekarbonisation, Lead UK FCDO. Chow Xialo, a Senior Director of Climate Environmental Defense Fund. Sander Huppert, Green and Digital Counselor, EU Delegation. Our moderator, Dr. Johannes Anhort from GIS Indonesia. Before leaving the stage, let us take a photo together first. I will count down. 3, 2, 1. Once again, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Our sincere appreciation goes to the speakers and the moderator. Please give applause. You may now return to your seats.